Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about a new proposed SAS. Now, this SAS is unrelated to the three-part series we just concluded on quality management, but is part of a new series we're going to talk about, which is on NOCLAR, or non-compliance with laws and regulations. So the AICPA, the ASB, the Auditing Standards Board, and PEAK, the Professional Ethics Executive Committee, have both issued proposals on NOCLAR. So this week we're going to talk about the SAS. Next week we're going to talk about the ethics proposal. So let's dive on in. As I mentioned, this is a proposed SAS, and it is focused on non-compliance with laws and regulations, in particular when there is a predecessor auditor. So this has been a really interesting process. As you can probably imagine, the international board, so the IAASB, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, they started working on an update to what is ISA 250, Consideration Laws and Regulations, which is similar to our AUC 250, back in 2016. But that was because the AICPA, the International Ethics Code, was updated. The AICPA has not revised 250 to be responsive because in the United States, we haven't seen any changes in our ethics rules. So therefore, it doesn't make sense to necessarily change 250 until we see that change in ethics. In fact, when we get to the vote for this, it was not unanimous. In fact, there was a dissent that basically said they don't even think we should be instituting this until the ethics is updated. So I think that's a very important consideration here. NASBA came out against the ethics proposal the first time it was proposed. And so all of this is really related. So you do want to make sure that you are checking in on these proposals to see how they're going. They are not unanimous. They are important, but they are not unanimous. So as I mentioned, this is a convergence effort for the IAASB, and there is a PEAK proposal, which we will talk about next week. So we are not proposing to update 250 to match the international standards. Instead, we're proposing a very narrow revision that's going to focus on when we take over as a new auditor and the discussions that we have with a predecessor auditor. And what we're going to do here is management is going to authorize the predecessor auditor to respond to inquiries from the successor auditor. And one of the inquiries is going to specifically be about suspected fraud and NOCLAR. We are not proposing any changes here to the auditor request for management to authorize. And we are, as we go through this, they had thought at one point about making this a precondition of the audit. They also thought at one point about making it a requirement of the terms of the engagement, right? That it would have to be in the engagement letter. They have concluded not to make either of those. Instead, it is when management authorizes us, we're going to have a series of questions that we're going to ask. And the expectation is that the successor auditor or the predecessor auditor would respond truthfully. So the auditor would be required to inquire of the predecessor auditor about any identified or suspected fraud in matters involving non-compliance with laws and regulations. So this would be an amendment to topic 210 as we look at this in terms of the impact. And so this is not changing 250. And then that predecessor auditor would be required to respond fully and timely and to indicate if the response is limited. And so when we think about this, the AICPA already has in AUC 210 that the predecessor auditor is expected to respond to inquiries promptly. But now they're giving us a little bit of detail. What is that going to entail and when is something going to be limited? So you're going to see here in 210, this is a quote from 210. It's not a direct quote because we use bullets instead of the lettering. But it says, if pursuant to paragraph 11, management authorizes, so again, it is based on authorization. If management doesn't authorize, then you should probably think about whether or not this is a great new client for you. But it doesn't, it doesn't allow you to ask the client, you can't do it without management's permission. So management authorizes the predecessor auditor to respond to the auditor's inquiry regarding matters that will assist the auditor in determining whether to accept the engagement. The auditor should inquire of the predecessor auditor about the matters that will assist the auditor in determining whether to accept the engagement. And so the areas of focus are identified or suspected fraud involving management, employees with roles and internal controls, or others when the fraud resulted in material misstatement. And then it says matters involving noncompliance or suspected noncompliance with laws and regulations that came to the predecessor auditor's attention during the audit other than when the matters were clearly inconsequential. So that would be the requirement here when we have that authorization. Now, if they authorize them to respond, we have to also worry about, is there a prohibition of law? Is there something that would prohibit them from providing something fully? Is there impending, threatened, or potential litigation? Is there something that would cause the response to be limited? If there is, it should indicate that in the response. We don't expect this to be super popular, but we did want to address it. In addition, they're not currently considering revisions to GAS that would require auditors to report fraud or NOCLAR to outside parties, such as appropriate authorities, the way you might see in a more regulatory audit. So that was considered, but decided against as part of this. So this is really a very narrow standard. It basically adds an additional specific inquiry and a response, but giving understanding as to what the limitations could be to that response. Other than that, that's all that's really in this new standard that's in here. They did not take it quite as far as the international standards. The proposed effective date is for audits of financial statements for periods ending on or after December 15, 2022. Early implementation would be permitted. All right, so that's a wrap on part 1. Again, this is the proposed SAS. Next week, we'll talk about the ethics proposal, and that really goes hand in hand with this whole overall concept. So not quite convergence with the international standards, but taking steps towards at least having a predecessor auditor provide information to a successor auditor that might impact their decision whether to take on a new client. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.